It started as something painfully ordinary. A late-night food pickup. A quiet restaurant glowing under tired fluorescent lights. The kind of place where time feels suspended, where the world outside slows down, and nothing important is supposed to happen. A few minutes of waiting before heading back out into the night. That's all it was meant to be. But in today's world, where everyone carries a camera, where attention is currency, and where fame moves faster than empathy, even the most routine moment can spiral into something unrecognizable. On February 15, 2026, a short video began circulating online. It wasn't polished. It wasn't edited. It wasn't staged. It was grainy, shaky, unfiltered. The kind of footage that feels more real because it lacks intention. Inside a Pizza Hut, a cashier stands behind the counter, their face lighting up with sudden recognition. A phone appears in their hand almost reflexively. The screen lights up. Recording begins. Excitement spills out. Audible, uncontrollable, innocent in intent but reckless in effect. Then something shifts. The energy in the room tightens. What begins as enthusiasm curdles into confusion. Panic replaces excitement. Voices rise. Movement becomes sharp. The mood fractures. Moments later, rumors erupt online like wildfire. Gunshots. A threat. A celebrity fleeing for his life. And attached to it all, almost instantly, was a familiar name. Kodak Black. But here's the real question. The one that gets buried under headlines and comment sections, and the one that actually matters. When a celebrity reacts defensively in public, are they being dramatic? Or are they responding to a lifetime of danger the rest of us never had to live through? Because this story isn't really about a Pizza Hut. It's about what happens when fame collides with trauma, and when fandom forgets where admiration ends and entitlement begins. When a camera changes everything. For most people, walking into a fast food restaurant barely registers as a memory. You think about the menu. You think about whether you're hungry enough to justify extra sides. You glance at your phone, maybe scroll for a minute, check the time. You wait. That's it. But when you've lived a life shaped by instability, violence, and constant scrutiny, there is no such thing as a neutral space. That night, Kodak Black walked into the restaurant dressed low-key. No entourage. No jewelry catching the light. No performance. Just a man and the mother of two of his children, Miranda Johnson, stopping in to grab food before the night ended. The restaurant was nearly empty. The air was quiet. Nothing about the scene suggested danger. Until recognition struck. The cashier's eyes widened. A moment of disbelief passed. Then excitement took over. Pure, unfiltered fandom. The phone came out before thought could intervene. Recording began. In that instant, the room changed. Kodak noticed immediately. His posture shifted. His shoulders stiffened. His attention snapped toward the device in a way that wasn't curious. It was alert. No smile. No acknowledgement. No leaning into the moment. Instead, he stepped back. He turned toward the door. He was ready to leave the food behind. Now pause for a second and ask yourself. If someone suddenly broadcast your location to the world, without asking, would you feel flattered or exposed? Online, many people laughed it off. It's just a phone. It's just a fan. He overreacted. But that opinion only exists if you've never seen how fast information can turn into danger. Why some cameras don't feel harmless. To understand Kodak's reaction, you have to understand what cameras have come to represent in certain worlds. A phone isn't just a device anymore. It's a beacon. Public place plus real-time video plus social media equals instant exposure. And exposure, in some lives, isn't exciting. It's lethal. Artists have been followed, robbed, ambushed, and killed after their locations were shared online, sometimes within minutes. Sometimes by strangers. Sometimes by people who thought they were fans. The line between attention and threat has eroded completely. So when Kodak saw that phone, he didn't see admiration. He saw risk. He saw unpredictability. He saw a situation slipping out of his control. And control, or the lack of it, has shaped nearly every chapter of his life. The moment that nearly fell apart. As Kodak moved toward the exit, the mood snapped again. The cashier's excitement collapsed into panic. Reality rushed in all at once. Something had gone wrong. Not legally, not violently, but emotionally. Apologies followed. Not polished ones. Not rehearsed. But frantic, genuine attempts to rewind time. A plea to stay. A request to finish the order. A realization that admiration had crossed into intrusion. Kodak paused. Hesitated. And then, against instinct, he turned back. That choice mattered. The tension eased. Voices softened. The phone lowered. This time, photos were taken with consent. Fist bumps replaced fear. The transaction ended quietly. No shots fired. No injuries. No chaos. But the internet doesn't wait for context. Clips were cut. Narratives were built. Assumptions hardened. And that leads to a deeper, more uncomfortable question. Who actually carries responsibility in moments like this? The fan acting on excitement, or the person who has spent a lifetime learning that attention can kill? A childhood without safety. To answer that, you have to go back much further than one night. Before the fame. Before the headlines. Before the controversies. Back to Pompano Beach, Florida. Kodak Black was born into poverty, raised by a single Haitian immigrant mother in public housing. His environment didn't offer safety nets or second chances. Violence wasn't shocking, it was normal. By the time most children were learning multiplication tables, he was learning survival. School wasn't a refuge. It was another battleground. He was expelled young, arrested early, and introduced to the criminal justice system before his identity had a chance to fully form. And when you grow up like that, trust doesn't come naturally. Neither does peace. Ask yourself this. If your earliest lessons taught you that the world is unpredictable and dangerous, how easily would you relax, even years later? Music as an exit, and a target. Music wasn't chosen for glamour. It was chosen because it was available. Words became shelter. Writing became structure. He studied language obsessively, building vocabulary where others built reputations. He rapped where others carried weapons. By his teens, attention followed. By his early 20s, fame arrived fast and loud. Mixtapes gained traction. Singles went viral. Industry doors opened. Chart success followed. But fame didn't erase the past. It magnified it. Suddenly, visibility brought success, and surveillance. Police, media, critics, strangers with motives no one could predict. And every incident reinforced the same lesson. You are always being watched. Fame without a safety manual. What people rarely talk about is how unprepared many young artists are for fame, especially those who come from instability. There is no training for constant exposure. No manual for navigating public spaces when half the room wants a photo and the other half might want something far worse. Legal troubles stacked alongside success. Arrests. Court dates. Incarceration. Probation. Releases. Relapses into public scrutiny. Each cycle carved the same message deeper. Mistakes aren't private. Moments aren't neutral. Attention is permanent. So when people ask why he reacted strongly to a phone camera, what they're really asking is why someone shaped by constant threat doesn't suddenly feel safe under a spotlight. The woman standing beside him. Another detail that night went largely unnoticed. Miranda Johnson, the mother of 2 of his children. Their relationship has played out publicly. Custody disputes, allegations, reconciliation attempts, private conflicts turned headlines. And that matters. Because when you're standing beside the mother of your children, especially amid unresolved tensions, every public moment carries consequences beyond yourself. A camera doesn't just capture an image. It captures narrative. It freezes context. It invites judgment. And once something is online, it never truly leaves. So ask yourself, would you feel calm knowing a stranger could shape a story about your family in seconds? Midpoint question. Retention anchor. At what point does public access become public entitlement? And when does that entitlement cross into danger? Because admiration without boundaries isn't harmless. And attention without consent isn't neutral. Why this moment resonated. The Pizza Hut incident didn't spread because it involved violence. It spread because it exposed tension we all recognize but rarely address. The fragile line between fans and figures. The ease with which excitement overrides judgment. The assumption that visibility erases humanity. For a mature audience, this story lands differently. It isn't gossip. It's a case study in how lived experience shapes instinct. Was Kodak defensive? Yes. Was he irrational? Not necessarily. Was anyone truly wrong? That's the harder question. A collision, not a crime. The cashier wasn't malicious. Kodak wasn't unreasonable. This wasn't a villain and victim story. It was a collision of worlds, one driven by admiration, the other by survival instincts forged long before fame entered the picture. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not outrage, not judgment, but awareness. Final reflection. We live in an age where recording is instinctive and sharing is immediate. But restraint has become rare. For people who live under constant observation, restraint from others isn't just polite, it's protective. So the next time you see a celebrity react defensively in public, ask yourself, what history are they carrying into that moment? What dangers have shaped their instincts? And if the roles were reversed, would you feel safe? Because sometimes, the loudest reactions come from the deepest scars. They call it a moment because it fits inside a thumb-sized frame. A slice of time you can pause, replay, loop, and weaponize. But moments don't arrive alone. They're freighted with histories, small decisions, old wounds, neighborhood rules, family dynamics, and a long list of off-camera choices that created the people who appear on screen. That's the knot you have to untie if you want to understand why a Pizza Hut video sparked more than jokes. It's why a cashier's nervousness looked like comedy to some and a siren to others. It's why a man who could have walked away instead stayed and gave everyone a different ending. One the internet refused to notice. What you watched for 40 seconds was only the shine on a much larger object. The real story is in the dents. The legal fights were over by the time the Pizza Hut footage showed up on a feed near you. If you read court transcripts, you could see the way people tried to domesticate the chaos, with forms, lines, and polite interrogations. But courtrooms are tidy places where mess is given names like battery and vandalism, where the human noise is abstracted into filings and boxes to check. Outside the courthouse, life doesn't fit into boxes. By September 3, 2025, the custody plan was signed. The litigation that had roared across headlines and talk shows eventually quieted into a set of arrangements, lawyers withdrawing almost apologetically from the center stage. Two people who'd publicly dragged each other through mud, accusations, arrests, humiliations, agreed to a framework that prioritized the children. That agreement was quiet. It was not cinematic. It did not trend. Peace is not good content. 5 months later, they were in a Pizza Hut. Two adults making an ordinary transaction, buying pizza for children. Nothing spectacular to announce on social. But someone filmed it. The clip found an audience that was not interested in nuance. It's tempting to zoom in and point at the most visible person in the frame, the celebrity. But if you're trying to understand what made the clip hit a nerve, widen the lens. Look at the cashier. Look at the immediate lived context. Look at the archive of moments that taught artists everywhere to flinch when a phone appears. The clip spread because it translated easily into the language internet platforms reward. A micro-drama you could tag, remix, and monetize. But it took minutes, not months, for the meaner corners of the internet to reshape the story into something else. A story about humiliation, about entitlement, about celebrity meltdown, and viral shame. The cashier's voice was clipped between laughter and mockery. His fear became a punchline. His plea not to be filmed, "Don't film me, man," was looped into reaction gifs. On forums, the clip became evidence in cultural debates about the limits of fame and the obligations of fans. And yet, beneath the meme there were other voices. People uneasy with the joke. They asked if the laughter was masking something darker. Because if you knew the history, If you knew how 2 decades of recorded violence had taught people in hip-hop to distrust visibility, you wouldn't be asking whether Kodak was paranoid. You'd be asking whether the phone in that cashier's hand was, in fact, just a phone. Think back to September 12, 2022. A restaurant in South Los Angeles, Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles, has been pulled into history because the unthinkable happened there. An artist went in and didn't come out. A masked gunman shot him in a robbery that, in the space of minutes, turned a celebrity's life into a family's permanent absence. There are hard facts in that narrative. The date, the place, the trial that followed. But the scar that violence left is less measurable. It lodged in other artists like a warning. It taught them that the line between public exposure and personal vulnerability can be porous, if not lethal. When someone who has watched friends fall becomes a public figure, their instincts change. Fans mean well. They often mean affection. But there are other actors, people who watch for vulnerability, for a phone that reveals a schedule or a location or the direction of travel. The difference between a friendly clip and a breadcrumb for someone with bad intent can be tiny. So when a phone comes out near someone who's carried those losses, they don't see an innocuous tool. They see a risk. They see a vector. Is it paranoia to treat filmed attention as dangerous when the world has shown evidence people will kill for loot and status? Or is it prudence? Kodak's reaction within the Pizza Hut clip is the fulcrum of misunderstanding. He sees the phone. He hears the cashier's voice. He feels the pressure that decades in the public eye have layered onto him. But these instincts are not the absence of reason. If anything, they're sharpened by reason. He knows that a short clip posted online can become a map in minutes. It can reveal more than a smile. It can reveal where you park, who you were with, and the path you'll take next. It can create a virtual breadcrumb trail. What Kodak chose to do, pause, assess, sidestep potential escalation, and finally leave, wasn't the moment people remembered. They remembered the image that matched their narrative expectations. A celebrity looking stern while a worker panics. The version that adapted into the internet's lexicon was simplified, flattened, and recirculated until even the participants' intentions were misread. But here's the crucial piece the feeds didn't want you to keep. He did not escalate. He did not weaponize his fame. He did not become the violent figure the algorithm suggested he might be. He engaged, concluded the transaction, and left. Why didn't that make for the headlines? Because calm endings don't get ads. They don't get bites. They don't generate the dopamine spikes that platforms sell. Which brings us to the cashier, an often invisible figure in viral moments, the person who is at once participant and instrument of entertainment. His voice cracks in the clip. He's human, nervous, starstruck, overwhelmed. What the internet made him into was a caricature. But in the longer feeding chain, on the checkout counter during the morning rush, dealing with threats of being recorded without consent, with managerial pressure and low wages, his reaction is a symptom of a broader environment, one where workers in public-facing roles are expected to remain cheerful while everything around them is commodified. Ask, what would you do if your job required both service and immediate emotional labor while a camera appended itself to your identity? How durable is public compassion when the service worker is both subject and audience for a global feed? The legal headlines had their own rhythm. Miranda Johnson, her name attached to trashing a luxury vehicle, to arrests for battery, was part of the chapter people were eager to read. The argument that spilled in public was filled with performative outrage and real human failure. The accusations felt like evidence to some and gossip to others. But when the dust settled, the real settlement was quieter. A parenting plan that pushed both adults toward a difficult, unspectacular compromise. The work of being a parent isn't content. It's repetition, logistics, negotiated custody exchanges, school pickups, midweek meals. Those routines don't create viral moments, but they create children who may one day see the footage and need context. Who is owed that context? The kids. The staff at the Pizza Hut. The cashier, who will continue to clock in. The public, who will continue to swipe. What happens when you live in a visible life? You learn to privatize certain things because the public cannot be trusted to carry nuance. The choice to prioritize children over narrative is a moral decision that audiences rarely reward. Why would they? Narratives that fit existing frames are easier to share. And yet, That decision, to choose privacy, to agree to a parenting plan instead of tearing the other to pieces in front of cameras, was one of the most meaningful acts in the story. It's the adult move people rarely notice because it's not dramatic. Is maturity visible? Or do we only recognize it when it's gone? There are many small scenes that the clip ignores. The Pizza Hut's fluorescent light, the grease smell and the hum of refrigerated units in the back. The cashier wiping his hands on his apron stained with marinara. The woman on the phone in the corner who thinks nothing of the celebrity in line because her child needs a pizza for practice. The manager glancing at the scene and weighing whether to intervene. Those details matter because they anchor the moment in a human geography that isn't designed for attention. Public spaces, especially low-wage workspaces, become arenas where the instantaneous eye of the internet can create pressure with no regard for the consequences. The cashier is not merely a clip. He is an employee with a story. Maybe he's a father. Maybe he's saving for school. Maybe his boss is on his back about theft and punctuality. That whole gravity well of pressure is compressed into the second his voice cracks. We laugh at that second because the platforms teach us to extract humor from human fragility. But what are we doing to the people who are most exposed? One of the understated tragedies of viral culture is this. It finds the easiest human to lampoon and makes that person the lesson for everyone. We patrol the boundaries of acceptable behavior using other people's nervous breakdowns as study material. And then we act surprised when discomfort becomes trauma. Have we considered what happens to someone's life after a clip becomes a meme? The anatomy of virality is a lesson in attention economics. Clips are designed to be consumed quickly. Social networks reward content that triggers emotive reactions. The angrier, funnier, or more shocking the better. That's why the calm resolution between Kodak and the Pizza Hut staff was invisible. It lacks the elemental sparks that the algorithms amplify. What remained visible, and worthy of repetition, was the short, emotionally raw moment that fit into the cultural scripts people were already primed to believe. The reposts framed the clip as evidence of two competing stories. The entitled star and the nervous worker, or, alternatively, a righteous star reminding people of boundaries. Both narratives oversimplify. But simplification is the language of virality. It's a currency. Which leads to the harder question. Whose wallet is being lightened by our attention? Who profits from stripping the context out of human moments and packaging them into short-form entertainment? Platforms, advertisers, influencer accounts. The same entities that sell clicks and accept little responsibility for what those clicks cost in real people's lives. Is the economy of attention morally accountable? Or does responsibility dissolve as the view count climbs? The clip spread was not the end. Public reaction extended beyond laughing comments. There were think pieces, hot take threads, and a small but persistent chorus questioning whether habitual filming of celebrities in public should be considered a form of aggression. Columns asked whether fans' sense of entitlement had ossified into a cultural default. When you are visible, people believe they have access to you. Social psychologists debated parasocial relationships. The illusion of intimacy that makes strangers feel like friends and taste permission to capture, post, and monetize. The conversation ballooned into larger cultural territory. Did hypervisibility, coupled with the collapse of boundaries between private and public life, produce a new kind of risk? How should society regulate the act of capturing content in spaces where people do not have the ability to consent? Museums have rules. Private events have security. Why did the public commons become a no-man's land where anyone could be filmed and judged without context? For many, the answer was simple. You should be nicer. But niceness is not an enforceable policy. Legislation moves slowly. Social norms move at the speed of culture war. So the quick remedy most people offered was to urge citizens to be better, more considerate, more empathetic. But empathy is not scalable if you don't provide alternatives. There are structural reasons people record: to capture a moment they deem rare, to gain followers, to stake a claim in the social media economy. If the incentive structure favors viral capture, holding individuals morally culpable becomes an inadequate fix. What would a different incentive structure look like? Should platforms deprioritize content captured in public without consent? Should there be a technology that blurs faces when a subject indicates they don't want to be filmed? There are solutions, but they require trade-offs. and trade-offs require leadership. Who should lead? After the clip, Kodak spoke directly to the camera in a way that surprised many. He could have hired a PR firm to sculpt a sanitized statement. He didn't. Instead, he talked about stakes that hit closer to home. Being a father, wanting family stability, not living for the approval of strangers. He called himself the zookeeper, an unflattering metaphor he used in jest to push back against caricatures. There was realness in his tone, an exhaustion that comes from living under constant surveillance. What was notable about his address wasn't the content. It was the candor. He refused the posture that many public figures adopt: careful, sanitized, litigation-conscious. He spoke in a way that suggested he was speaking for a broader community. Artists who worry about being turned into targets by the ease of location sharing, artists who have lost friends and want to keep their lives and families intact. That speech didn't change the internet's incentive structure, but it changed a few people's minds. It made some listeners consider the deeper stakes beyond entertainment, what it costs to be visible. How often do public figures get to control the story? Rarely. But when they do, what they choose to prioritize reveals a lot. He prioritized children over clicks. That's a choice worth noticing. This is the point where the story stops being about celebrities and starts being about us. It asks a question that is simple and brutal. When you reach for your phone the next time you see someone famous, what do you owe them? It's not a question about legality. It's a question about ethics. A photo in itself is not violence. But an image is not neutral when it becomes a piece of a larger chain that can expose, endanger, or erase someone's privacy. The act of filming is an action that carries weight. It is not merely passive documentation. And yet, cultural scripts teach us to treat it as harmless. The public's moral imagination is still catching up with the tools we built. We made cameras ubiquitous before we decided how to behave with them. Do we owe people a courtesy, a conversation, a refusal to post? Or do we reserve judgment about public behavior for the platforms that monetize crueler, quicker responses? There are other quieter parts of the story. Moments that don't trend but that might change a life more than 1 million reposts. The manager who later spoke to the cashier, offering him a short paid day off because the young worker had been shaken. A mother who saw the clip and wrote into the local paper, explaining how she was relieved the two parents had chosen their children over public spectacle. A neighbor at school who helped with pickups when tensions were highest. These acts of small mercy are the scaffolding of recovery. They are repair in material forms. Time, money, labor. What does repair look like in an era of instant amplification? It looks like human beings committing to each other outside the loop of metrics. It looks like communities that hold each other accountable with care rather than spectacle. It looks like policies at companies that discourage clipping and posting of private moments as entertainment. It looks like legal frameworks that better protect people from predatory filming practices without policing everyday citizen behavior. But most of all, it looks like an internal recalibration, asking whether the moment you're about to take is worth what it could cost someone else. Would you take a picture if you knew it could place someone in danger? When you read a viral caption, remember this. The writer of that caption chose a frame to make a point. The video may be only a second long, but it's surrounded by longer stories, histories, and consequences. If you care about human flourishing, it's worth asking whose stories are being amplified and whose are being flattened. The artists who have survived violence carry lessons we ignore at our own peril. They see the world with a wariness others may find excessive because they have learned by loss. Their caution is not just for themselves. It's a lesson about a public that has to learn restraint before it learns compassion. The Pizza Hut clip ends, in the footage, with neatly packaged moments. An order placed, hands exchanged, and two people walking away. But the unwritten pages that follow, parenting plans, quiet apologies, the names of children, those are where meaning lives. Those things don't get hashtags. They get days, bills, and midnight conversations. If we are going to live inside a culture transformed by ubiquitous capture, perhaps the least we could do is enact a habit of asking, before I film, what might this cost someone else? Before I post, what story am I choosing to tell? Before I laugh, who am I judging? The answers to those questions are simple and difficult at once. Simple because they ask for basic attention and human decency. Difficult because they require us to change patterns that reward fast, loud reactions. So here's another question to leave with. What kind of public do we want to be? One that celebrates growth and chooses privacy for fragile moments? Or one that profits, noisily and relentlessly, from other people's fractures? If you're honest with yourself, your choice is already being made every time you swipe and tap. Because sometimes the most revealing part of a viral moment isn't what happens on camera. It's what happened long before the recording began, and what happens long after the view counts stop climbing. And if you want to be part of a different future, start there. By choosing, in those small private decisions, not to make someone else's life the price of your entertainment.